We are going to cover insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. I'm going to break some myths. I'm going to give you tips to reverse those conditions easily and without too much pain or complication. I'm really excited to get started with this topic, so let's do it. Okay, first things first. Type 2 diabetes is a global epidemic. The International Diabetes Federation, they publish numbers every year, and they have found that 537 million adults in the world are now living with type 2 diabetes, and another 541 million are living with prediabetes. These numbers are getting worse every single year. So right now, 1 billion people in the world have either type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. And as I'm going to explain, this is all linked to insulin resistance. We need to do something about this. This is because of the food environment we live in. We need more regulation in food companies. But we also need to be educated so that we can figure out how to navigate this difficult landscape that is causing these issues. The first thing to understand is that these conditions are not genetic. Type 2 diabetes is not something you're born with, nor is it something you can't do anything about. It's a consequence of diet and lifestyle choices, and it's not your fault. The food available today is making our health worse and driving up diabetes rates globally. I'm here to give you information that will help you navigate this complicated landscape. How do we know that type 2 diabetes isn't genetic? We have several proofs. First, it used to be called adult-onset diabetes because only adults would get it. Now, even 5-year-old children are diagnosed with this condition, and our genes haven't changed that rapidly. What has changed is our diet and food environment. Second, scientific studies on identical twins who have identical DNA show that if one twin has type 2 diabetes, the other might not necessarily have it. This inconsistency indicates that it's influenced by factors beyond genetics. Lastly, and most compellingly, hundreds of studies show that changing our diet can put type 2 diabetes into remission. If you've been diagnosed with diabetes, medication isn't your only option. By changing your eating habits, you can put this condition into remission. When you're not insulin resistant, you're considered healthy. As you become more insulin resistant, you're labeled pre-diabetic. When insulin resistance becomes severe, you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So insulin resistance and its spectrum determine whether you have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. If you've been diagnosed with insulin resistance, it means you're somewhere on that spectrum, possibly nearing prediabetes. Insulin resistance is not fixed. It can increase or decrease based on your lifestyle choices. Every part of the body uses glucose for energy. For example, fingers moving, the mouth speaking, and the brain processing information are all fueled by glucose. It is the most important fuel in the body, obtained from eating food. Specifically, glucose comes from eating starches like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, and oats, as well as from sugars. Anything that tastes sweet, from an apple to a slice of chocolate cake. When these starches or sugars are consumed, they break down into glucose. Eating these foods raises blood glucose levels, especially if consumed in large quantities. These foods are known as carbs. When a lot of carbs are eaten in a meal, a glucose spike occurs, which is a rapid increase in blood glucose levels. This spike can be observed if blood glucose is measured. It appears as a sharp rise on a graph. Glucose spikes can cause tiredness, cravings, and inflammation in the body. Most importantly for today's conversation, glucose spikes lead to your body releasing insulin. Why does your body respond to glucose spikes with insulin? Because it knows that big glucose spikes are not good. So, it signals the pancreas, asking for insulin to help bring the glucose levels down. Insulin arrives, grabs the excess glucose, and stores it in the liver, muscles, and fat cells. You might wonder, if glucose is the body's energy source, how could you possibly have too much of it? Think of it like watering a plant. The plant needs water to live, but too much water will drown it. The human body is similar. A small amount of glucose makes it happy, but too much causes problems, particularly glucose spikes. After a meal with lots of carbs, a big glucose spike occurs, insulin comes in, grabs the excess glucose, and stores it in your cells. When there's a high level of insulin in your body for an extended period, your body gradually becomes resistant to it. This means that more and more insulin is required to manage the same amount of glucose and store it in your cells. As a result, your body starts producing even more insulin to keep up with the demand. Over time, this can lead to a cycle where you need increasingly higher amounts of insulin to achieve the same effect. This condition, known as insulin resistance, can contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders. It's a vicious cycle. Over time, maybe months or years, your body will need much more insulin to move glucose from your bloodstream into your cells. This is insulin resistance in a nutshell. Now, what's the consequence? If you continue eating the same way, consuming carbs that increase your glucose levels, you're giving your body too much glucose without realizing it. Eventually, because of insulin resistance, insulin won't work as effectively, and it won't be able to store all the excess glucose. This causes your blood glucose levels to rise, as the excess glucose isn't being managed as efficiently as before. When you visit the doctor, they measure your fasting glucose level, which reflects how much glucose is in your blood after not eating overnight. If your diet doesn't cause many glucose spikes, you won't have excessive insulin in your body. If you're not very insulin resistant, your fasting glucose level will be normal and healthy, typically around 85 or 90. However, if you've been eating in a way that causes frequent glucose spikes, you'll have a lot of insulin in your body, leading to insulin resistance and higher glucose levels. Your doctor might then notice that your fasting glucose level is elevated. Here are the ranges your doctor will consider. If your fasting glucose is below 100, you'll be told you're healthy, with no prediabetes or diabetes. If your fasting glucose is between 100 and 126, your doctor will say you're prediabetic. If it's above 126, you'll be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. These levels indicate how insulin resistant you are. High glucose levels mean you have significant insulin resistance. They go hand in hand. You can certainly do something about your insulin resistance and diabetes. It's not a life sentence or something you're born with. Your daily eating habits significantly impact your condition. For those curious about the science, a notable 2021 review highlighted that the most effective way to reverse type 2 diabetes is by flattening your glucose curves and avoiding glucose spikes. The evidence is so compelling that even the American Diabetes Association now supports diets that minimize glucose spikes as an effective method for managing and potentially reversing diabetes. This approach focuses on adjusting your diet to lower both glucose and insulin levels, which is crucial for improving your condition. By adopting such dietary changes, you can significantly impact your health and work towards putting your diabetes into remission.